blood on marble floors was not the cruelest thing she had ever witnessed. The real cruelty came from her own father, who once slid a contract across a mahogany table and traded her future to a monster simply because she could not bear children. She had become defective in his eyes, until the city's most feared widower stepped forward and changed everything. The sterile white walls of the private clinic on the Upper East Side offered no comfort that morning. Madeline Rossi sat stiffly on the edge of the examination table, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. Across from her, the specialist delivered his diagnosis with the flat detachment of a man reading off a weather report. Severe endometriosis, complicated by a rare uterine abnormality. The words blurred together, ringing in her ears like a death knell. She would never conceive. There would be no miracle treatments, no medical intervention that could undo the damage. In the eyes of her family, her body had become a barren wasteland. In ordinary society, this diagnosis would have been a private heartbreak. In the closed, brutal world Madeline came from, it was a death sentence. She was the only daughter of Frank Rossi, a ruthless capo who ran his operation out of Brooklyn. For 23 years, she had been raised like a prized heirloom, groomed for a single purpose, to secure a powerful alliance by producing the next generation of a criminal dynasty. She had already been promised to Vincenzo, a violent underboss from a rival family who had demanded at least 3 sons. When Frank received the phone call from the doctor, whatever fragile paternal affection he had once carried for his daughter shattered instantly. Madeline returned to the sprawling Rossi estate in New Jersey, the wrought iron gates clicking shut behind her like the bolt of a prison cell. Her father was waiting in his study, a glass of scotch in one hand and the crumpled medical report in the other. He did not ask how she felt. He offered no comfort. Instead, he hurled the heavy crystal glass into the brick fireplace, shattering it into 1,000 glittering pieces. Worthless, Frank spat, his face purple with rage. 23 years of feeding you, clothing you, protecting you, and you cannot even do the one thing a woman in this family is born to do. Vincenzo called off the engagement immediately, saying he did not deal in broken merchandise. Madeline's mother, Helen, stood in the corner with her arms crossed, offering no defense for her daughter. In their world, a woman who could not bear children was considered a liability, nothing more. Over the following 2 weeks, Madeline became a ghost inside her own home. Her allowance was cut off, her jewelry confiscated, her dignity stripped away piece by piece. But the true horror was still ahead of her. Frank Rossi was not a man who accepted a loss quietly. If his daughter could not be used to build an empire, she would be used to settle a debt. He owed a staggering sum to a volatile Albanian crime syndicate led by a sadistic enforcer named Arben Haja, a man who cared nothing for bloodlines or heirs. He cared only about possession, about breaking beautiful things until nothing remained. The exchange was arranged for a rainy Tuesday night. Madeline was ordered into a simple black dress and given no explanation before being shoved into the back seat of her father's Lincoln. The tires hissed against wet asphalt as they drove deep into an industrial stretch of Queens, stopping outside an abandoned warehouse that had been converted into an underground lounge. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the low murmur of dangerous men. Arben waited at a rusted steel table in the back, a massive scarred man with cold, dead eyes. He studied Madeline the way a butcher studies meat on a hook. "She is quiet," he said, his thick accent cutting through the silence. He reached out and gripped her chin, forcing her face upward. She did not flinch, though a tremor ran down her spine. She had already accepted her fate. "She is whatever you want her to be," Frank said with a nervous laugh. "The debt is cleared. She is yours. Do what you want with her. I wash my hands of the disappointment." Arben smiled, revealing gold-capped teeth, and pulled a leather satchel across the table, unzipping it to reveal stacks of Frank's outstanding notes. "A fair trade, Rossi," he said. "I will make sure she earns her keep." Madeline closed her eyes and waited for the darkness to take her. But before Arben could drag her away, the heavy iron doors of the warehouse groaned open, the sound echoing through the cavernous space like a gunshot. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The music stopped. Even Arben's grip on her chin loosened. Dominic Romano stepped into the dim light. 36 years old, built like a heavyweight fighter, dressed in a flawless charcoal suit. He was the head of the Romano syndicate and the undisputed power along the entire eastern seaboard. Where Frank was a bottom feeder and Arbin a common thug, Dominic was something far more dangerous, an apex predator who answered to no one. 2 years earlier, a rival family had planted a bomb beneath his wife's car. Dominic had survived. Camilla had not. Since that day, he had eliminated his enemies with a cold, mechanical precision that terrified even the most hardened men on the commission. But his victory had come at a devastating cost. He had been left to raise 4 traumatized children alone. Luca, 12 and full of simmering rage. Matteo, 9 and completely withdrawn. Sophia, 6 and plagued by night terrors. And little Bianca, barely 4, who could no longer remember her mother's face. Every nanny quit within a week. Every tutor fled. And the women who circled him, widows and daughters from other families, all wanted the same thing, a child of their own blood, which in his world was often a quiet death sentence for the children who came before them. Dominic's gaze swept across the warehouse and landed on the transaction unfolding at the back table. He had only come to collect a routine payment from Arbin, but his sharp ears had caught the tail end of Frank's pitch. "Mr. Romano," Arbin stammered, stepping back from Madeline. "We did not expect you so soon." "Keep your money," Dominic said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that silenced the room instantly. His eyes were locked entirely on Madeline. Despite the terror radiating from every man around her, her expression held a strange, hollow defiance. She was not pleading for her life. She was simply waiting for the end. That absolute resignation struck something deep inside Dominic's chest. "I hear you are settling a debt," he said to Frank without turning his head. "Yes, Don Romano," Frank stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "A family matter." "Not anymore," Dominic said, stepping closer to Madeline, his broad shoulders blocking out what little light there was. "The girl comes with me." Arbin's pride briefly overrode his instinct for self-preservation. "With respect, a deal was already struck," he said. "She belongs to me." Dominic turned toward him slowly, his expression so utterly blank that Arbin instinctively stepped backward. "I was not making an offer," he said quietly. "I was stating a fact. If you want to argue the point, we can step outside, but only one of us walks back in." The silence that followed was absolute. Arbin raised his hands. "She is yours." Dominic looked down at Frank. "Your debt to him is cleared," he said. "But now you owe it to me, and I do not accept trade-ins. You have 30 days. Frank's knees nearly buckled, but Dominic had already turned away from him. He slipped off his heavy suit jacket and draped it over Madeline's shivering shoulders. "Walk," he said, placing a firm, steady hand against the small of her back. She did not speak. She simply allowed herself to be guided out of the warehouse and into the cold night air. A black armored SUV waited at the curb. Dominic opened the door himself and climbed in beside her once she was settled. The privacy divider rose, sealing them off from the world, and the vehicle pulled away, leaving her old life behind in the rain. For several minutes, the only sound was the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers. Finally, Madeline broke the silence, her voice hoarse. "My father must have said it loud enough for you to hear. I am not able to have children. If you bought me to build a bloodline, you have wasted your money." Dominic poured her a glass of water and handed it to her. "I did not buy you," he said. "I rescued you. And yes, I heard exactly what your father said." He turned to face her fully, something in his expression softening just slightly, revealing an exhaustion that ran bone deep. "I do not need an heir," he said. "I already have 4 children who have lost their mother, who are terrified of the world, and who need someone who will fight for them without question. Every woman in my circle looks at my children and sees obstacles standing between them and a family of their own. Your father called you defective. I call you exactly what my children need. I am offering you my protection, my name, and a life where no one will ever hurt you again. In return, I am asking you to help me heal what is left of my family." Madeline stared at him as his words settled over her fractured spirit. For the first time since she had left that clinic, something like purpose flickered faintly in her chest. She was not being delivered to a slaughterhouse. She was being delivered to a broken home, and for the first time in her life, the very thing that had made her worthless to one family might make her invaluable to another. The gates of the Romano estate parted with a low mechanical groan, revealing a long driveway lined with towering oaks. Set within the quiet wealth of Oyster Bay on Long Island, the property looked less like a family home and more like a fortress, its ivy-covered walls dotted with the blinking lights of hidden security cameras. Inside, the house was a study in cold elegance, all imported marble and sweeping staircases, but it felt entirely without warmth. There were no family photographs lining the halls, no toys scattered across the floors, no trace of a lived-in home. It was, in every sense, a beautifully guarded museum housing 4 grieving children. Dominic led Madeline upstairs, bypassing the master suite entirely, and showed her to a room across the hall from the children's bedrooms. "This is your space," he said. "My men will collect anything you want from your father's house tomorrow, though I would suggest starting fresh. You are a Romano now, even if only in name for the time being. We will finalize the paperwork by the end of the week." "And the children?" Madeline asked. "When do I meet them?" "Tomorrow morning," he said, a flicker of exhaustion crossing his sharp features. "But I should warn you, they are not easy. The staff calls this wing a war zone. Do not expect a warm welcome. They have driven away every caregiver on the East Coast." Madeline's expression settled into quiet resolve. "Caregivers get paid to tolerate them," she said. "I have nowhere else to go. I can afford to be patient." The next morning, the long dining table felt like a frozen battlefield. Madeline arrived early, dressed simply, and stood near the doorway as the 4 children were brought in by a nanny who looked like she was counting the minutes until her shift ended. Luca, 12, was the image of his father, same dark hair, same piercing blue eyes, and a simmering anger far too heavy for a child to carry. He glared at Madeline with open hostility. Matteo, 9, refused to meet anyone's eyes, his shoulders hunched as he gripped his younger sister's hand. Sophia, 6, looked pale and hollow-eyed from another sleepless night. And little Bianca, 4 years old, simply stared at Madeline with wide curiosity while clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. "Who are you?" Luca demanded, his voice cracking but full of venom. "Another one of my father's hired babysitters? You can pack your things right now. We do not want you here." Madeline did not flinch. She did not offer a falsely sweet smile or the patronizing tone most adults used on frightened, angry children. Instead, she walked calmly to the table and sat down across from him, folding her hands in front of her. "My name is Madeline," she said evenly, "and I am not a babysitter. I am not here to be your friend, and I am certainly not here to replace your mother. I am here because your father asked me to keep you safe. I have nowhere else to go, Luca. So you can yell, you can break things, and you can try to scare me off, but it will not work. I am staying." Luca blinked, caught off guard by her blunt honesty. He was used to women who feared him or flattered him to win favor with his father. Madeline offered neither. She simply offered a steady, immovable presence. He scowled, kicked the leg of the table, and dropped into his chair without another word. The breakthrough did not come overnight. For 2 difficult weeks, the household remained tense. Luca tested her constantly, once shattering an antique vase just to see how she would react. Matteo stayed silent, retreating further into himself. The turning point came during a violent thunderstorm on a Tuesday night. Madeline was reading in her room when a scream tore through the hallway. She dropped her book and ran barefoot across the cold marble floor into Sophia's room. The 6-year-old was thrashing in her bed, tangled in her sheets, screaming for a mother who would never answer. Madeline did not hesitate. She climbed into the small bed and pulled the girl against her chest. "I have got you," she whispered fiercely, ignoring a sharp kick to her shin. "You are safe. I am right here. Nothing can reach you while I am holding on." She began humming a soft, familiar tune, something her own grandmother used to sing long before her family had fallen apart. Slowly the thrashing stopped. Sophia's panicked gasps turned into steady breathing, and she buried her face in Madeline's neck, small hands gripping the fabric of her sweater like a lifeline. Standing in the doorway, Dominic watched the entire scene unfold. He had rushed upstairs at the sound of the scream, only to find Madeline already there, handling the crisis with an instinctive grace he had not witnessed since his wife's death. Something tightened in his chest. What had begun as a desperate decision made in a grimy Queens warehouse was becoming something far greater than he had expected. By the end of the month, the tension in the house had begun to thaw. Mateo started sitting beside Madeline while she painted, eventually handing her a brush and speaking his first words to her in months. Bianca demanded to be carried everywhere and fell asleep in her lap most afternoons. Even Luca's hostility softened into a grudging respect. Madeline never lied to them, never patronized them, and never looked at them as obstacles standing between her and children of her own. They were her only chance at motherhood, and she protected them fiercely. While peace slowly settled over the Oyster Bay estate, a storm was building in the city. Frank Rossi's 30-day deadline had passed, and he did not have the money to pay what he owed. His reputation within the criminal commission was already in ruins after selling his own daughter to an Albanian enforcer, and desperation pushed him toward one final, catastrophic decision. He reached out to Arben Haja, meeting him quietly at a midtown steakhouse. Over dinner, the two men devised a plan. They knew Dominic loved his children more than anything. If they could take one of them, he would forgive any debt and pay handsomely to get the child back safely. They targeted Luca, who attended an elite private school in Locust Valley. Despite the heavy security surrounding the Romano children, Frank had inside knowledge of their routes and schedules. The ambush came on a quiet Friday afternoon. Madeline had insisted on riding along to pick Luca up herself, wanting to surprise him with his favorite pastry, freshly baked by the estate's chef. The armored SUV waited by the school gates, a second vehicle trailing behind with 3 armed guards inside. As the dismissal bell rang, Luca walked out toward the car, offering Madeline a small wave through the tinted glass. Then the afternoon shattered into chaos. A delivery van slammed into the trailing security vehicle, trapping the guards inside. A black sedan screeched to a stop, blocking the SUV's path, and 4 masked men spilled out with weapons drawn. "Lock the doors," Madeline screamed to the driver, but Luca was still outside, frozen on the sidewalk as 2 of the masked men ran toward him. Without thinking, she threw open the armored door and sprinted directly into the chaos. "Luca, get down," she shouted, diving across the pavement and tackling him behind a brick column just as a shot rang out. Pain tore through her shoulder, but she did not let go. She dragged him to the ground and curled her body over his, shielding him completely. Blood soaked through her blouse as she pressed his face against her chest so he would not have to watch. "I have got you," she gasped. "You are safe." The gunfight lasted less than a minute. The surviving guards drove off the attackers, and police sirens soon filled the air. Luca looked up at Madeline's pale, blood-drained face. "You are bleeding," he said, his voice shaking. "You are bleeding so much." "It is okay," she whispered, her vision beginning to blur. "You are safe. That is all that matters." Her grip loosened, and the darkness took her. When Madeline woke, hospital lights blinded her. Her shoulder was bandaged, and Dominic sat beside her bed, motionless. "Luca," she croaked. "He is unharmed because of you," Dominic said, taking her hand. "Arben and your father planned it together. They are both dead. It is finished. There is nothing left to fear." The door opened, and Luca stepped inside, tears in his eyes. He walked to her bedside. "You took a bullet for me," he whispered. "Thank you, Mom." The word landed like a wave, and tears slipped down Madeline's cheeks. Dominic watched them, something guarded in him finally breaking open. He stood and pulled a small velvet box from his jacket, revealing a flawless diamond ring. "I do not want a marriage of convenience anymore," he said softly. "I want you beside me as my equal, as my wife." Madeline looked at the man who had given her a purpose she never thought she would find again. "Yes," she whispered through the lingering pain, her smile finally, truly genuine. If this story moved you, if Madeline's courage and Dominic's devotion stayed with you, let us know in the comments. Share it with someone who loves a good redemption story, and subscribe for more gripping tales every week.